Ella's heart raced as she stepped into the dimly lit office, her fingers trembling as they grasped the stack of papers she'd been tasked with delivering. At 23, she was the youngest intern the prestigious law firm had ever hired, and she was determined to make a lasting impression. What she hadn't counted on was the impression James Blackwood, the firm's charismatic senior partner, would make on her. James looked up from his desk, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. At 45, he exuded an air of confidence and power that both intimidated and enthralled her. His salt and pepper hair was neatly styled, and his tailored suit accentuated his broad shoulders and lean physique. "Ah, Ella," he said, his deep voice sending a shiver down her spine. "Come in. I've been waiting for those briefs." Ella stepped forward, willing her legs not to betray her nervousness. "Here they are, Mr. Blackwood. I've reviewed them as you requested and made some notes on the areas that might need further attention." James raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Initiative. I like that." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down. Let's go over your findings together." As Ella settled into the plush leather chair, she couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and apprehension. This was her chance to prove herself, to show that she was more than just a pretty face in a sea of interns. But as James leaned in closer, his cologne enveloping her senses, she found it increasingly difficult to focus on the task at hand. For the next hour, they pored over the documents, James listening intently as Ella outlined her observations. He asked probing questions, challenging her reasoning and pushing her to think deeper. With each exchange, Ella felt a growing sense of exhilaration. It wasn't just the intellectual stimulation, though that was certainly part of it, but the way James looked at her, as if he was seeing her for the first time. As their impromptu meeting drew to a close, James leaned back in his chair, a look of admiration in his eyes. "I'm impressed, Ella. You've got a sharp mind. I think you'll go far in this field." Ella felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I'm learning so much here and I'm grateful for the opportunity." James stood up, buttoning his jacket as he did so. "Please, call me James. I think we can dispense with the formalities, don't you?" Ella's heart skipped a beat as she rose to her feet. "Of course. James." As she turned to leave, James called out to her. "Ella, wait. I have a proposition for you." She turned back, curiosity piqued. "Yes. I'm working on a high-profile case and I could use an assistant I can trust, someone with fresh eyes and a keen intellect. Would you be interested in working more closely with me on this?" Ella's mind raced. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to work directly with one of the most respected lawyers in the city. But there was something else, an undercurrent of tension between them that both thrilled and terrified her. "I'd be honored," she heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. James smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Excellent. We'll start tomorrow. Be prepared for long nights and intense work. This case could make or break both our careers." As Ella left the office, her head spinning with excitement and trepidation, she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. Over the next few weeks, Ella found herself spending more and more time with James. They worked late into the night, poring over case files and strategizing their approach. The case was complex, involving a multinational corporation accused of environmental violations and cover-ups. The stakes were high, and the pressure was intense. But amidst the legal intricacies and long hours, something else was brewing. Ella found herself increasingly drawn to James, captivated by his brilliance and charisma. She hung on his every word, savouring the moments when their hands would brush as they reached for the same document, or when he'd lean in close to whisper a confidential piece of information. For his part, James seemed to be just as affected by her presence. His eyes would linger on her a moment too long, and he'd find excuses to touch her. A hand on her shoulder, a gentle squeeze of her arm. It was subtle, never crossing the line into inappropriate behaviour, but the tension between them was palpable. One night, As they worked late in his office, the rest of the firm long since deserted, James loosened his tie and sighed heavily. "This case is going to be the death of me," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Ella looked up from the stack of papers she was reviewing, concern etched on her face. "You're working too hard, James. Maybe we should call it a night." He shook his head, a wry smile on his lips. "No rest for the wicked, I'm afraid. But you should go home, Ella. You've done more than enough today." "I'm not leaving you here to work alone," she said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" James looked at her then, really looked at her, and Ella felt her breath catch in her throat. The intensity in his eyes made her feel as if she was the only person in the world. "What did I do to deserve you?" he murmured, his voice low and husky. Before Ella could respond, James had crossed the room in 2 quick strides. His hands cupped her face, and then his lips were on hers, hot and insistent. Ella gasped, her mind reeling, but her body responded instinctively. She melted into his embrace, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervour. It was passionate, desperate, years of pent-up desire unleashed in a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ella knew that everything had changed. "We shouldn't," she whispered, even as her body yearned for more. James rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I know," he said. "But God help me, Ella, I can't resist you any longer." That night marked the beginning of their affair. They tried to keep it professional during working hours, but stolen glances and secret touches became the norm. Late nights at the office took on a new meaning, their work interspersed with passionate encounters that left them both breathless and craving more. Ella knew it was wrong. James was not only her superior, but also married, though he claimed his relationship with his wife had been loveless for years. She wrestled with her conscience, torn between her growing feelings for James and the knowledge that what they were doing could destroy both their careers if discovered. But the thrill of their forbidden romance was intoxicating. Ella had never felt so alive, so desired. James made her feel beautiful, intelligent, and worthy. When they were together, the rest of the world faded away, and nothing else mattered but the two of them. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened. They began to share more than just physical intimacy. James opened up about his unhappy marriage, his fears of growing old and irrelevant. Ella confided in him about her insecurities, her dreams for the future, and her complicated relationship with her family. But as their emotional connection grew stronger, so did the risks. They became bolder, less cautious. Stolen kisses in the elevator, lingering touches in meetings, clandestine rendezvous in out-of-the-way restaurants. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed. That someone turned out to be Sarah, another young associate at the firm. Ella had considered her a friend, but she soon realized how naive she had been. Sarah had always harbored resentment towards Ella, viewing her rapid rise within the firm as a threat to her own ambitions. One evening, as Ella was leaving James's office, smoothing down her slightly rumpled clothes, she nearly collided with Sarah in the hallway. The knowing smirk on Sarah's face told Ella everything she needed to know. Their secret was out. "Well, well," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Burning the midnight oil again, Ella. You and Mr. Blackwood certainly seem dedicated to the case." Ella felt her face flush, a mix of shame and anger coursing through her. "It's not what you think, Sarah," she began, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Sarah's smirk widened. "Oh, I think it's exactly what I think. And I wonder what the partners, not to mention Mrs. Blackwood, would think about it." The threat was clear. Ella's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this situation. But she knew she was trapped. Sarah had the upper hand, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Over the next few weeks, Ella found herself at Sarah's mercy, the once friendly colleague now delighted in assigning Ella the most tedious and time-consuming tasks, keeping her away from James and the high-profile case they had been working on together. Ella was forced to work longer hours, her stress levels skyrocketing as she tried to balance Sarah's demands with her other responsibilities. James noticed the change in Ella's demeanour, but seemed oblivious to the cause. When he questioned her about it, Ella brushed off his concerns, not wanting to burden him with the truth. She feared that if James knew about Sarah's blackmail, he might do something rash that would expose their affair and ruin both their careers. As the pressure mounted, Ella found herself withdrawing from James. The guilt and fear were eating away at her, tarnishing the once passionate affair. She began to question everything: her feelings for James, her place at the firm, the choices that had led her to this point. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, a glass of wine in hand and tears streaming down her face, Ella made a decision. She couldn't continue like this. The secrecy, the lies, the constant fear of discovery, it was all too much. She had to end things with James, for both their sakes. The next day, she asked to speak with him privately. As they stood in his office, the scene of so many of their passionate encounters, Ella felt her resolve wavering. But she steeled herself, knowing that what she was about to do was necessary. "James," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk about us." He looked at her, concern etched on his handsome face. "What's wrong, Ella? You've been distant lately. Have I done something to upset you?" Ella shook her head, fighting back tears. "No, it's not you. It's everything. This situation we're in, it's not sustainable. We're living a lie, and it's killing me." James reached for her, but Ella stepped back, knowing that if he touched her, her resolve would crumble. "Ella, please," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I know it's been difficult, but what we have is special. I love you." The words hit Ella like a physical blow. It was the first time he had said those 3 words to her, and part of her soared at hearing them. But another part, the rational part that had been screaming at her for months, knew that love wasn't enough. "I love you too, James," she whispered, tears now flowing freely. "But love isn't enough. Not when it's built on deceit and betrayal. We're hurting people. Your wife, our colleagues, ourselves. It has to stop." James's face crumpled, a mix of pain and desperation in his eyes. "We can make it work, Ella. I'll leave my wife. We can be together openly. Just give me time to sort things out." But Ella was already shaking her head. "No, James, it's too late for that. The damage is already done." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she had to say next. "I'm resigning from the firm. I can't work here anymore, not with everything that's happened." James looked as if she had physically struck him. "Ella, no. You can't throw away your career over this. We can find another way." But Ella's mind was made up. She had spent sleepless nights agonizing over this decision, and she knew it was the right one, no matter how much it hurt. "There is no other way, James. Not for me. I need a fresh start, away from all of this." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, her formal resignation letter. She placed it on his desk, her hand lingering for a moment on the crisp paper. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I truly am. But this is goodbye." Before James could respond, before he could try to change her mind, Ella turned and walked out of his office. She kept her head high as she made her way through the firm, ignoring the curious glances of her colleagues. It wasn't until she was in the elevator, alone, that she allowed herself to break down, her sobs echoing in the small space as the reality of what she had done hit her. The next few weeks were a blur for Ella. She threw herself into job hunting, desperate for a new start. She ignored James's calls and emails, each one a painful reminder of what she had lost. Sarah, realizing that her leverage was gone, backed off, but the damage to Ella's reputation at the firm had already been done. It was a month after her resignation that Ella finally landed a new job at a smaller, more ethical law firm. The position wasn't as prestigious as her role at James's firm, but it offered her something far more valuable: peace of mind. On her first day at her new job, as Ella stood outside the modest office building, She felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She was about to step into a new chapter of her life, one untainted by the mistakes of her past. As she reached for the door handle, her phone buzzed with a text message. Against her better judgment, she looked at it. It was from James. "I understand now why you did what you did. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Goodbye, Ella." Ella felt a lump form in her throat as she read the message. Part of her would always love James, would always wonder what might have been if circumstances had been different. But as she looked up at her new workplace, she knew she had made the right choice. With a deep breath, Ella deleted the message and pushed open the door. She was ready to face her future, older and wiser, but with her head held high. The passionate, tumultuous chapter of her life with James was over, but a new story was just beginning. And this time, Ella was determined to write it on her own terms. As she introduced herself to her new colleagues, Ella felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The secrets, the lies, the constant fear of discovery, all of that was behind her now. She had learned the hard way about the consequences of giving in to forbidden passion, but she had also learned valuable lessons about herself, about integrity, and about the kind of person she wanted to be. In the months that followed, Ella threw herself into her new role with renewed vigor. She worked hard, rebuilding her reputation not through clandestine affairs or office politics, but through dedication, skill, and ethical behavior. Slowly but surely, she began to feel proud of herself again. There were moments, of course, when memories of James would surface. A whiff of familiar cologne, a legal brief reminiscent of their shared case, the sight of a salt-and-pepper-haired man in a sharp suit, all could transport her back to those heady days of passion and secrecy. But with each passing day, the pain dulled, replaced by a bittersweet nostalgia and, eventually, acceptance. 1 year to the day after she had walked out of James's office for the last time, Ella found herself working late, poring over documents for an important case. As she leaned back in her chair, stretching out the kinks in her neck, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was different from the naive intern who had first stepped into James Blackwood's office. Her eyes held a wisdom born of experience. Her posture spoke of a quiet confidence. Ella sonrió a su reflejo, sintiendo un sentido de paz que se derramaba sobre ella. She had survived the storm of her affair with James, had weathered the consequences of their actions, and had come out stronger on the other side. The passion she had felt for him had been real, consuming, and ultimately destructive. But it had also been a catalyst for growth, pushing her to confront hard truths about herself and what she truly wanted out of life. As she turned back to her work, Ella felt a renewed sense of purpose. She may have lost something in walking away from James and her old life, but she had gained so much more. Integrity, self-respect, and the knowledge that she was strong enough to make the right choice, even when it was the hardest thing she had ever done. As the weeks turned into months, Ella found herself thriving in her new environment. The smaller firm offered her opportunities she might never have had at her previous job, allowing her to take on more responsibility and showcase her talents. Her colleagues respected her for her work ethic and sharp mind, not for any whispered rumours or clandestine relationships. It was on a crisp autumn morning, almost 18 months after leaving her old life behind, that Ella's carefully reconstructed world was shaken once again. She was rushing into the courthouse, arms full of files for a case she was second chair on, when she quite literally ran into someone. "I'm so sorry," she began, struggling to keep her grip on the files, when a familiar voice made her freeze. "Ella?" She looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she met James Blackwood's piercing blue eyes. He looked older, more tired than she remembered, but still undeniably handsome. For a moment, all the old feelings came rushing back. The passion, the excitement, the forbidden thrill of their affair. But along with those emotions came the memories of the pain, the guilt, the constant fear of discovery. Ella took a deep breath, steadying herself. "James," she said, her voice calm despite the turmoil inside. "It's been a while." He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "It has. You look well, Ella. The new job seems to agree with you." There was an awkward pause, neither quite sure what to say. Around them, the bustle of the courthouse continued, lawyers and clients rushing by, oblivious to the tension between the two. Finally, James spoke again. "I've thought about you often, wondered how you were doing. I wanted to apologize for everything. You were right to leave when you did. It took me a long time to see that, but you were always the smarter one." Ella felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm sorry too for my part in it all. We both made mistakes." James nodded, a sad smile on his face. "We did. But I hope you don't regret everything. Despite how it ended, I treasured our time together." Ella considered his words carefully before responding. "I don't regret it," she said finally. "It was complicated and painful, but it taught me a lot about myself, about what I'm capable of, both good and bad." Just then, a voice called out from down the hallway. "James? Where are you? We're due in court in 5 minutes." Ella saw a flash of panic cross James's face, quickly replaced by resignation. He turned towards the voice, waving to acknowledge he'd heard. "My wife," he explained, turning back to Ella. We're trying to work things out." Ella nodded, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. "I'm glad," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I hope you find happiness, James. You deserve it." James looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. "So do you, Ella. So do you." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of people filling the courthouse corridor. Ella watched him go, feeling a chapter of her life truly close for the first time. As she made her way to her own courtroom, Ella felt lighter somehow. Seeing James had stirred up old memories, but it had also shown her how far she'd come. The passionate, reckless intern who had fallen into an affair with her married boss was gone, replaced by a woman who understood the complexities of love, desire, and the consequences of one's actions. The case Ella was working on that day was a pro bono effort, representing a group of low-income families fighting against a corporation that had polluted their neighborhood's water supply. As she sat beside her senior partner, listening to the opening arguments, Ella felt a surge of pride. This was why she had become a lawyer, to fight for justice, to make a difference in people's lives. Over the next few weeks, Ella threw herself into the case with renewed vigor. The work was challenging, the hours long, but she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing in her previous job. She was no longer just chasing success and prestige. She was using her skills to genuinely help people in need. It was during this time that Ella met Michael, an environmental scientist who was serving as an expert witness in their case. Unlike the intense, immediate attraction she had felt with James, her connection with Michael grew slowly, built on shared values and mutual respect. Their first date was nothing like the clandestine, passion-filled encounters she had shared with James. Instead, it was a simple dinner at a local restaurant, followed by a long walk in the park. They talked for hours about their work, their dreams, their views on the world. For the first time in a long time, Ella felt truly seen and understood. As their relationship developed, Ella found herself opening up to Michael about her past. One night, curled up on his couch, she told him about James, about the affair, about the pain and growth that had followed. She held her breath, waiting for his reaction, half expecting him to judge her or walk away. Instead, Michael listened with compassion, holding her hand as she spoke. When she finished, he kissed her gently. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said. "We all have a past, Ella. What matters is who we choose to be now, and the person I see in front of me is someone I admire and care for deeply." Ella felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by his acceptance and understanding. In that moment, she realized that this honest, open, equal relationship was what she had been searching for all along. As the months passed, Ella's life settled into a rhythm she had never thought possible. Her career was flourishing. The pro bono case had been a success, bringing justice to the affected families and earning her firm a reputation for taking on tough, meaningful cases. Her relationship with Michael deepened, built on a foundation of trust, mutual respect, and shared values. It wasn't always easy. There were times when the memories of her past would surface, bringing with them waves of guilt or regret. But Ella had learned to face these feelings head-on, to acknowledge them without letting them define her. She had made mistakes, yes, but she had also learned from them, grown from them. 2 years to the day after her chance encounter with James at the courthouse, Ella found herself back in that same building. This time, she was there to be sworn in as a partner at her firm, the youngest in its history. As she stood before the judge reciting the oath, Ella felt a sense of completion. She had come full circle, from a naive intern swept up in a passionate but destructive affair, to a woman who had faced her mistakes, learned from them, and built a life she could be proud of. The path hadn't been easy, but every step, even the painful ones, had led her to this moment. As she turned to face the small crowd gathered to witness the ceremony, Ella's eyes met Michael's. He smiled at her, his face full of pride and love. Beside him sat her parents, beaming with joy, and her colleagues from the firm, applauding her achievement. In that moment, surrounded by the people who truly knew and supported her, Ella felt a profound sense of gratitude. The passionate, secretive relationship with James had been a crucible, burning away her illusions and forcing her to confront hard truths about herself. But from those ashes, she had built something real, something lasting. As she stepped down from the podium, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Ella caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the courthouse's grand mirrors. The woman looking back at her was strong, confident, and at peace with herself. She had loved passionately, made mistakes, faced the consequences, and emerged stronger for it all. Ella sonrió a su reflejo, luego se volvió para abrazar su futuro. The story of her affair with James would always be a part of her, a chapter in the complex narrative of her life. But it was no longer the defining story. Instead, it was a stepping stone, a difficult but necessary part of the journey that had led her to where she was meant to be. As she left the courthouse that day, hand in hand with Michael, Ella felt ready for whatever the future might hold. She had learned the hard way that love, real, lasting love, was about more than just passion. It was about trust, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable. It was about growing together, supporting each other's dreams, and facing life's challenges as a team. The sun was setting as they walked down the courthouse steps, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ella paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the scene and the warmth of Michael's hand in hers. She thought about the long, winding path that had brought her to this moment, the highs and lows, the passion and the pain, the mistakes and the growth. And as she stood there, on the threshold of this new chapter in her life, Ella felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had weathered the storm of her affair with James, had faced the consequences of their actions, and had come out stronger on the other side. The passion she had felt for him had been real, consuming, and ultimately destructive. But it had also been a catalyst for growth, pushing her to confront hard truths about herself and what she truly wanted out of life. Now, as she looked towards her future with Michael, with her thriving career, and with the hard-won wisdom she had gained, Ella knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The story of her passionate betrayal had ended, but a new story, one of love, integrity, and purpose, was just beginning. And this time, Ella was ready to write every page with honesty, courage, and hope.